Every road trip feels like an adventure. But in the Appalachian Mountains, some roads don't want you to come back. Tonight, we're diving into 10 of the most disturbing true road trip horror stories buried deep in those mountains. Before we dive into tonight's horror, tell me something first. Where are you watching from right now? Which city, which town, which place? Drop it in the comments below, because I want to see just how far these stories are reaching. Now settle in, turn the lights off if you dare, because we're about to begin. It always starts with a stretch of road no one wants to be on after midnight. Route 16 in West Virginia looks like any other mountain road during the day. Rolling hills, thick woods that hug the shoulders of the asphalt, and an endless horizon of trees that make you forget what year it is. But at night, it becomes something else entirely. Locals call it the road where time folds back on itself, where headlights catch things that shouldn't exist, and where drivers swear the silence is heavy enough to choke you. It was on that road that Jason and Eliza Harper found themselves one October night, driving back from a family gathering in Charleston. They had argued about leaving late, but Jason wanted to avoid traffic, and Eliza insisted they'd be fine. The clock on the dash glowed 1:14 a.m., and the mountains around them felt alive in the dark. Jason had the window cracked, the smell of damp leaves drifting in, and Eliza was half asleep with her head leaning against the passenger side. That was when the figure appeared. At first, it looked like a trick of the high beams, something pale standing just beyond the bend. Jason slowed instinctively, squinting at the sight. A woman. She stood on the gravel shoulder, arms crossed tightly around herself as if she were freezing. She wore a long, white dress that seemed far too thin for the chill in the air, her hair dark and loose, spilling across her shoulders. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stood with her head tilted slightly down, as though waiting. Jason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Eliza stirred, blinking groggily, then sat up straighter when her eyes adjusted. She's standing in the road, Jason. Stop the car." Every instinct in him screamed to keep driving, to pretend he hadn't seen her, but some mixture of guilt and curiosity made his foot press the brake. The tires crunched gravel as they pulled to the side. The woman raised her head then, slowly, like a puppet on invisible strings, and Jason swore his breath caught in his throat. Her face was pale, not the pale of exhaustion or cold, but the washed-out gray of something that didn't belong in the living world. Her lips were parted, but she didn't speak. Her eyes were the worst part, too wide, unblinking, shimmering strangely in the beam of the headlights. Eliza lowered her window, her voice trembling as she leaned out. "Miss, are you all right? Do you need a ride?" The woman only nodded once, her movement stiff and deliberate. Jason felt a weight settle in his stomach, but before he could protest, the rear passenger door clicked open. He hadn't even seen her reach for the handle. She was just inside, sitting there, her white dress spilling across the seat like mist. The air in the car turned colder instantly. Jason gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. Eliza turned around, trying to smile at the woman. Where are you headed?" The woman's voice was barely a whisper, rasping like leaves dragged across pavement. "Home." Just that one word, and nothing else. Jason forced his eyes forward, pulling the car back onto the road, but every nerve in him screamed that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. The rearview mirror betrayed him. He couldn't help but glance at it, and what he saw didn't sit right. The woman wasn't seated like a normal passenger. She was too still, her spine rigid, hands folded neatly in her lap, and her reflection wasn't aligned with her body. It was slightly off, like an echo half a second too late. Jason tried to focus on the road. The trees seemed denser now, branches arching overhead to form a kind of tunnel. The headlights cut through a fog that hadn't been there moments ago. Eliza was murmuring soft questions, trying to ease the silence. "What's your name? Where's your home?" The woman tilted her head, her hair falling to the side in a curtain of black. "They know me. They'll know when I come back. Jason shivered. Ooh, Eliza asked softly. The woman turned her face toward the window, and Jason swore he saw condensation bloom across the glass, like frost forming from her breath, but her lips hadn't moved. Then he noticed something else. The fabric of her dress was wet. Not damp, not slightly soaked, dripping. A steady trickle of water pooled at her feet, seeping into the car's floor mats. Jason's throat tightened. He didn't dare say anything, but the stench of river water was unmistakable, sharp and earthy. He thought of the Elk River that ran parallel to Route 16, twisting like a dark vein through the mountains. Eliza noticed too. She pulled her feet up slightly, eyes darting toward Jason. He gripped the wheel harder, pretending not to see. The woman spoke again, sudden and sharp, making both of them jump. Turn here. Her pale hand lifted, pointing to a narrow gravel path barely visible off the main road. Jason stammered, There's nothing down there. No lights, no houses. But her voice cut through him, cold and commanding. Turn. Against every ounce of reason, his hands moved. The car lurched onto the path, stones crackling under the tires. Trees closed in tighter, branches scraping the roof like claws. The air inside the car grew unbearable, heavy with moisture. Jason's windshield fogged despite the defroster blasting. He wiped it with his sleeve, his pulse pounding in his throat. Then the woman began to hum, a low, wavering tune that made Jason's skin crawl. Eliza whispered, It's a hymn. I think. It sounds like an old hymn. The words weren't clear, but the melody carried something ancient, something mournful. Jason couldn't take it anymore. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaking. What do you want from us? The woman's humming stopped. The silence after was worse. Slowly, she leaned forward, her face close enough for Jason to see her reflection in the glass. Her eyes, there was nothing human left in them, just dark water, rippling endlessly. They never found me, she whispered. Not all of me. Jason swore, his chest tightened, a suffocating pressure pressing down on him. Eliza gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Jason glanced in the rearview mirror again, but the seat was empty, gone. His blood ran cold. He jerked the wheel, the car swerving dangerously on the gravel path. She's gone, Eliza, she's gone. But the sound of water dripping continued, steady, impossible. Eliza's scream tore through the car as claw marks etched themselves across the inside of the window, deep and jagged, the glass groaning under the force of invisible hands. Jason slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the suffocating dark. The engine sputtered, then died. They sat frozen, breaths ragged, the sound of water dripping echoing around them. Jason reached for the ignition, fumbling, but the key refused to turn. Eliza whispered, Jason, don't look behind you. His hands trembled on the wheel. He could feel it, the weight of something pressing into the back seat, cold and wet, the air thick with decay. Slowly, against every instinct, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She was there, closer than before, her face inches from his, her lips parted in a grin too wide for her face, water spilling from her mouth like a broken faucet. Jason's scream caught in his throat as the windshield shattered inward, icy river water gushing into the car. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him was her voice, soft and mocking, home. When Jason and Eliza awoke, it was daylight. The car sat idling on the shoulder of Route 16, perfectly dry, no sign of water, no shattered glass. The rear seat was empty. But when Jason checked the back window, his stomach dropped. The claw marks were still there, etched deep into the glass. To this day, locals warn travelers not to stop on Route 16 when they see a pale woman in white. Some say she drowned in the Elk River after a car crash decades ago. Her body never fully recovered. Others whisper she drags the living down to finish what the river started. But everyone agrees on one thing: if you see her on the side of the road, don't stop. Because once she gets in your car, she never really leaves. Coal Miners Road isn't on most maps. It's one of those Appalachian backroads that feels like it was carved more by tragedy than design. Long, winding, hugging the cliffs, with hairpin turns sharp enough to carve tire rubber clean off. Locals don't like to talk about it, but anyone who grew up near Logan County knows the stories. They say the road is cursed, that it remembers every drop of blood spilled on its asphalt, and that when night falls, it doesn't let go of the dead so easily. For decades, truckers hauling coal through the mountains have whispered about a convoy of headlights that appear out of nowhere. 3 lights moving steadily ahead of you, always just far enough that you can never quite catch up. Some drivers swear they followed those lights for miles, only for them to vanish without warning at Dead Man's Curve, a turn where dozens of rigs plunged into the ravine below during the 1950s coal boom. Most called it superstition, a story for rookies, until a man named Caleb Branson learned the truth the hard way. Caleb had been hauling for 15 years, a man built from long nights, black coffee, and a voice that always sounded tired. He didn't believe in ghost stories. His life was iron, diesel, and asphalt. But one winter night, hauling a half-loaded rig down from Logan, he ended up on Coal Miners Road. It was supposed to be faster, a shortcut. His dispatcher warned him about the curves, but Caleb wasn't worried. He'd driven worse. The clock on his dash read 2:07 a.m. when he saw the first set of headlights. He was coming out of a slope, fog curling low like smoke across the pavement, when 3 lights cut through the mist ahead. It wasn't the usual 2 beams of a single truck or car. It was 3, evenly spaced, moving with perfect rhythm, like a convoy traveling in unison. Caleb squinted. "Guess I ain't alone out here," he muttered, settling back in his seat. He figured it was 3 trucks hauling together, keeping close on the dark stretch. He followed their glow, comforted in a way. There's a kind of safety in company, even if it's just taillights in the dark. For 20 minutes, the lights stayed exactly the same distance ahead, no matter how much he pressed the accelerator. He'd speed up, they'd glide faster. He'd slow, they'd dim just enough to never fall behind. It felt almost deliberate, like they were tethered to his speed. But what began as comfort soon turned into unease. Caleb realized he hadn't seen a single reflective sign. No mile markers, no guardrails. Just that endless ribbon of road and the 3 lights, glowing pale through the fog. He cracked his window, the winter air biting his skin, and listened. Nothing. No distant hum of engines, no echo of other trucks. Just the low growl of his own rig and the eerie silence of the mountains. He leaned forward, frowning. Convoys didn't run this tight at night. Not on a road like this. "What the hell?" he muttered, his chest tightening. As the curve approached, Caleb's memory stirred. He'd heard old-timers talk about this road. Dead Man's Curve, a sharp left where the road seemed to fall out from under you. During the 1950s, coal companies pushed drivers to haul through snow, rain, whatever it took. Dozens never made the turn. Their trucks plunged straight down the ravine, engines screaming into the void. Caleb's father once told him, "That road eats men whole." He hadn't thought about it in years, not until now, with those 3 lights leading him straight to it. Sweat prickled his skin despite the cold. His hands clenched the wheel as the curve came into view. A jagged bite carved into the mountain, no guardrail, nothing but black emptiness yawning on the other side. The 3 lights ahead didn't slow. They glided smoothly into the bend. Caleb braked hard, his tires squealing, his whole rig shuddering as it fought against momentum. His headlights caught the mist curling over the edge of the cliff, and then he saw it. The 3 lights didn't make the turn. They drove straight through the air, hovering for a moment like stars sinking into the abyss, before vanishing in silence. No crash, no echo, just gone. Caleb's heart hammered so hard he thought it would burst. He slammed his rig into reverse, backing away from the curve, his breath fogging the cab. No, his voice shook. He sat there staring at the drop, headlights cutting through the mist that seemed to curl into faces, screaming mouths, hands clawing upward from the darkness below. Then the temperature dropped. The windshield frosted over in seconds, the glass spider webbing with ice. Caleb wiped it with his sleeve, but what he saw in the frost made his stomach twist. Handprints, dozens of them. Pressing from the outside, palms flattened against the glass, dragging streaks down as if trying to climb in. His radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static so loud it made him flinch. Then a voice came through, faint, broken, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Keep going, follow us." Caleb froze. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. The voice didn't sound alive. It was hollow, wet, like lungs filled with gravel. He yanked the radio knob, but it didn't shut off. The voice repeated, louder this time, overlapping with others, male, female, screaming, begging, "Follow us, follow us." Caleb's instincts screamed to floor it, to get off that cursed road, but his body felt locked, paralyzed. In his side mirror he caught movement. Headlights. 3 of them. Not ahead this time, but behind. Closing in fast, bright and wrong, too bright for halogen, almost white, blue like burning magnesium. His throat tightened. He slammed the gear shift forward, his rig lurching ahead as the lights gained. They weren't trucks. They weren't cars. They were orbs, glowing fiercely, pulsing like hearts in the fog. They weaved together in perfect formation, herding him toward the curve. Caleb roared, "Not tonight, you bastards." He gripped the wheel and veered hard onto a dirt pull-off, his rig bouncing violently. The lights shot past him, gliding straight over the cliff once again, dissolving into nothing. Silence followed. The radio died. The frost melted from the windshield. Caleb sat there shaking, his chest heaving, tears burning his eyes. For the first time in years, he prayed out loud. When dawn came, he finally crept his rig back onto the road. The sunlight made everything look normal, almost harmless. But when he passed Dead Man's Curve, his stomach lurched. Lining the edge of the cliff were pieces of rusted metal, twisted axles, fragments of old rigs half buried in the earth. And carved into a splintered post at the side of the road were dozens of names, dates stretching back 70 years. Caleb stopped the truck, his legs weak as he climbed out. At the bottom of the list, scratched into the wood, was his own name, Caleb Branson. His blood ran cold. The date was that very night. He scrambled back into his cab, refusing to look again, and drove until the mountains faded into daylight. He never hauled through Logan County again. He quit coal runs altogether a month later. When other truckers asked why, he only said one thing: "If you see 3 lights on Coal Miners Road, don't follow. They ain't leading you anywhere you want to go." To this day, drivers swear they still see the convoy. Some claim to hear voices on their radios, begging them to keep up. A few never come back at all. The road doesn't care if you believe the stories. The road remembers. And if you follow those 3 lights into the curve, the road will make sure it remembers you too. It was supposed to be a shortcut. A group of 4 friends on a long Appalachian road trip, tired of endless winding roads and gas station coffee, decided to shave a little time off their route by cutting through a forgotten stretch in Virginia. The GPS didn't even show the path, but one of them, Derek, swore he had read about an abandoned railway tunnel that cut straight through the ridge and would get them closer to their motel. He called it a local legend, a place people whispered about, though he never explained why. By the time they found it, the sun was already melting behind the ridges, shadows stretching across the asphalt like ink stains. The entrance looked wrong, as though the mountain itself had grown over the man, made wound, and was trying to swallow it back whole. Vines crept over the stone arc, and the mouth of the tunnel gaped like a black hole, the kind of darkness that swallows flashlights whole. Rusted "Anatpespa" signs hung half-torn on leaning poles. There was even an old barrier made of wood and chain, though most of it had rotted to nothing. At first, everyone laughed. It was creepy, sure, but what wasn't creepy in these mountains at night? The Appalachians are full of abandoned coal mines, collapsed shafts, tunnels that lead nowhere. People get superstitious. So, against better judgment, they parked the car just outside the arch and grabbed their phones for light. The air grew colder the moment they stepped past the threshold, and the sound of their sneakers echoed unnaturally, as if the tunnel didn't just reflect noise but multiplied it. They walked for maybe 5 minutes when the first sound came. A faint hum, like someone softly singing far away. Derek stopped. He swore it was just the acoustics of their own chatter bouncing around. But then they all went quiet, holding their breath, and the sound didn't stop. It grew clearer, sharper. 4 voices at least, singing together. The words were hard to make out, but the melody was unmistakable. It was a hymn. Laura, the most skeptical of the group, pulled out her phone to record. "It's probably some kids messing with us," she whispered, though her voice cracked. But the further they went, the more the singing swelled. It wasn't just 4 voices, it was dozens. Layer upon layer of harmony, rising and falling, filling the tunnel like invisible smoke. The hymn was haunting, almost mournful, and yet perfectly in tune, as though they were standing in the middle of an old church service. But the tunnel was supposed to have been sealed for more than 100 years. No one could have been inside, no one living anyway. They argued in hushed tones. Derek wanted to go further, convinced they'd find squatters or pranksters. Laura wanted to turn back. Kevin, the quietest of the group, just kept his light pointed at the ground, refusing to look into the dark ahead. And Emma, clutching Kevin's arm, whispered something that made them all fall silent. "Do you hear it?" The voices, they're saying names. They listened harder. Between the rises of the hymn, something new slipped through. Whispers. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all murmuring in the cracks of the song. And yes, some of them were names. Laura's name, then Kevin's, Emma's, Derek's, spoken as though they'd always belonged there, woven into the hymn itself. Panic settled like a weight in their stomachs. Emma begged to leave. Kevin turned around and started walking back, fast, his light trembling. But the moment they turned, the singing shifted. It no longer came from ahead of them. It came from behind. From the entrance they'd just walked through. Laura ran first. Her shoes slapped against the damp ground, her phone light shaking wildly. The others followed. The hymn rose to a deafening pitch, voices surging like a wave behind them. Their own names echoed louder, clearer, as though the tunnel itself had memorized who they were. Some voices were kind, almost pleading. Others were angry, spitting their names like a curse. They reached the entrance, gasping, hearts pounding. But something was wrong. The car was still there, parked just where they'd left it, but the world outside wasn't the same. The moon hung too low, fat and orange like it was pressed against the treetops. The forest was silent, too silent, not a single cricket or owl. And the air, it smelled of smoke, not cigarette smoke, not firewood, the acrid, suffocating smoke of coal. Derek swore and turned back to the tunnel, but the entrance behind them was no longer a black hole. It glowed faintly, as if lanterns flickered deep inside. Shadows moved along the stone walls, shapes of men with pickaxes, women in long dresses, children holding candles. Their faces were pale, dust-streaked, their mouths open in silent song. Laura screamed. Emma collapsed, sobbing, clutching her ears. The hymn had followed them out. It was all around now, as though the forest itself was singing. They piled into the car, Kevin fumbling the keys, hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to jam them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and they sped down the narrow mountain road, the tunnel shrinking in the rear view. But even as the trees swallowed it from view, the sound didn't fade. It clung to the air inside the car, soft but steady, a choir carried on phantom wind. They didn't stop driving until they hit a town an hour away, pulling into a gas station under bright fluorescent lights. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Laura played back the recording on her phone. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped it. The screen showed static, nothing but garbled audio. But in the middle of the distortion, a single voice cut through, sharp and cold. It didn't sing, it didn't whisper. It simply said, "You don't leave, you just return." And when she closed the phone, the battery was dead, drained in an instant. None of them ever talked about it again, at least not publicly. But weeks later, Kevin was found sleepwalking in the middle of the night, humming the same hymn under his breath. Emma swore she heard her name whispered whenever she stood near a church. and Laura, she never went back to the mountains. But sometimes, in the silence between dreams and waking, she swore she heard the choir still singing, a hymn that never ended. The Appalachians have always carried a reputation for things unexplainable. Old mining towns swallowed by time, forgotten graveyards where no stone stands straight, and lonely roads that seem to stretch forever through forests too thick for the sun to reach. People who drive these back roads at night often whisper about strange things they see. Figures on the shoulder who vanish when headlights hit them, sudden fog that blinds every turn, voices in the trees that don't belong to any living thing. But one of the strangest, most disturbing stories tied to these mountains doesn't involve a ghostly hitchhiker or a haunted tunnel. It's a story about a simple rusted mile marker, a piece of metal meant to guide travelers, that instead became a bleeding wound in the road. It happened to the Harper family in the late fall of 1992. They were on their way home from visiting relatives in Kentucky, taking a scenic route through the Appalachian backroads. Robert Harper was behind the wheel, his wife Diane sat beside him, and their two kids, 16-year-old Mark and 12-year-old Katie, were dozing off in the back seat as the car hummed along the winding road. The sun had already dipped low, and a damp mist clung to the ridges, making the forest look like an endless shadow. That's when Diane noticed something odd. "Robert, slow down," she said, pointing out the passenger side window. Just off the shoulder stood an old mile marker, one of those metal posts with faded white paint. Only this one looked wet. Even from the road, she could see something thick and dark dripping down its side, pooling at the base like syrup. Robert eased the car to a stop. He was the kind of man who couldn't pass up a mystery without at least looking closer. Mark groaned in the back seat, annoyed at yet another delay. But curiosity had already taken hold of the car. They stepped out into the chilly air, their shoes crunching on gravel. Up close, the mile marker was worse. The paint was nearly gone, rust chewing through the metal, but that wasn't what made Diane cover her mouth. From a seam near the top, a steady trickle of red liquid oozed down the surface, thick and sticky, catching the fading daylight in a way that looked too familiar. It wasn't water, wasn't rust runoff. It looked like blood. Katie whimpered, pulling at her brother's sleeve. Mark touched it, because of course, a teenager wouldn't believe it until he proved it himself. He jerked his hand back almost immediately. "It's warm," he whispered. "It's actually warm." His fingertips were stained crimson. The family argued in panicked whispers. Diane wanted to get back in the car immediately. Robert said it had to be some kind of prank, maybe hunters messing around. But the longer they stood there, the more wrong it felt. The smell hit them next, coppery sharp, unmistakable, the smell of fresh blood. That's when they noticed the ground. At the base of the marker, where the red liquid pooled, the soil was dark, almost black, as if it had been soaking it up for years. Grass refused to grow in a perfect circle around it. Robert pulled his daughter back when she tried to step closer. Then, without warning, a cold gust of wind ripped through the trees. It sounded like a low moan, the kind that rattles your chest more than your ears. The forest fell silent. No insects, no owls, no rustling leaves. Just the sound of that drip, drip, drip against the metal post. They didn't stay. Robert practically shoved everyone back into the car and floored it down the road. No one spoke for miles, too shaken by what they had just seen. But the silence wasn't complete. Diane swore she still smelled that copper tang inside the car, even with the windows rolled up. Katie cried softly, whispering that she could still hear the dripping. When they finally reached a gas station in the next town, Robert asked the attendant if he'd ever seen anything strange on Route 23 near the ridge. The man's expression changed instantly. He went pale, then muttered, "You didn't stop, did you?" The Harpers exchanged nervous looks. "We did," Robert admitted. The man shook his head. "Locals don't go near that mile marker. Folks say it marks where the Caldwell family was murdered back in '63. Whole family, Father, mother, 3 kids, found hacked to pieces in their car, right there on the road. Never solved. Some say the blood never left the ground. The county put up a mile marker after they cleared the wreck, but it's never been right. People claim it bleeds every year around the same week they died. The Harpers didn't sleep that night. Diane locked the motel door 3 times, as if that would keep the memory out. Mark scrubbed his hands in the bathroom sink until his skin turned raw, but he swore he could still see faint red stains in the creases of his palms. And Katie kept waking up, insisting she could hear something dripping in the corner of the room. Months later, when the family finally tried to put the incident behind them, something happened that pulled it all back. Robert received a speeding ticket in the mail, issued from a traffic camera he'd driven past weeks after the trip. Attached was a blurry photo of their car. But what made his blood run cold wasn't the fine. It was the shape just visible in the rear window. In the grainy black and white photo, 3 figures sat in the back seat. Robert knew only 2 were supposed to be there. The third was small, head bowed, hands folded as if praying. And down the side of the car, almost invisible until Diane pointed it out, was a streak. A dark, wet streak that looked exactly like blood. After that, they stopped talking about it completely. But even years later, whenever someone asked the Harpers about their scariest trip through the mountains, Diane's face would tighten. Mark would look away, and Katie, by then an adult, would mutter the same sentence she'd said as a child that night, the one that never left her. The marker wasn't bleeding, it was remembering. It started as a simple late-night drive, the kind of impulsive decision young people make when boredom collides with the thrill of the unknown. 2 friends, Nolan and Ezra, had been exploring the Appalachian backroads on their way back from a music festival in North Carolina. They weren't in any particular hurry to get home. Both 22, both restless souls with a love for empty roads and the sense that adventure always lay just around the bend. The night was clear, the stars bright, and the mountains wrapped them in shadows that felt older than memory. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the road they'd chosen that night wasn't any ordinary stretch of asphalt. It was the kind of road that bends not only through the forest, but through time, through perception, through something darker. It was just past midnight when Nolan, who was behind the wheel, noticed the barn. It was a squat, lopsided structure leaning heavily to one side, its wood splintered gray by decades of weather. There was a single floodlight perched at the top of a pole in the yard, glowing faintly yellow as if fighting against the dark. Beside it was a crooked mailbox, leaning like a weary old man about to fall. Nolan remarked casually to Ezra, "Looks like something out of a horror movie," and they both chuckled, the way you do when the night is still innocent and laughter is still possible. 10 minutes later, Ezra sat up straighter in his seat. "Oh, dude," he said slowly, "didn't we just pass that same barn?" Nolan frowned. The headlights caught the same sagging roof, the same pale wood, the same crooked mailbox, and the same glow of the tired floodlight. "Nah," Nolan muttered. "Must just be a common look around here. Old barns all look the same." But Ezra wasn't so sure. He twisted in his seat, craning his neck to watch the structure vanish into the rearview mirror. Another 10 minutes passed. The road wound and curved through the mountains, lined with trees that crowded so close it felt like they were leaning in. Ezra had started counting the minutes on his watch. Exactly 10 minutes later, his stomach dropped. There it was again. The barn, the same sag, the same mailbox, the same muted floodlight that flickered once before going steady again. He grabbed Nolan's arm. "Don't tell me you don't see it. That's the same place." Nolan laughed, but his voice cracked in the middle. He wanted to shrug it off, to chalk it up to coincidence, but his hands had tightened on the wheel. He drove on, the air inside the car growing heavier, silence stretching out between them except for the low hum of the tires against the cracked pavement. 10 minutes later, the world betrayed them again. The barn stood waiting, as if it had never been left behind at all. Ezra swore under his breath. "We're looping. We're actually looping. Nolan, turn around. Take a different road. Get us out of here." Nolan's knuckles were white now. He slowed the car, pulled onto a side road that branched off, gravel crunching under the tires. They drove for nearly 15 minutes this time, deeper into the dark. The trees grew thicker, the stars seemed farther away, and Ezra could have sworn the forest pressed closer with every mile. Relief began to creep into their conversation, until they rounded a bend and saw it, the barn, waiting. This time the floodlight buzzed and flared brighter as their car approached, as if it had been expecting them. The mailbox leaned lower, like it was about to collapse, but never did. Ezra was shaking his head now, muttering, "This isn't right. This isn't right." Nolan pulled over abruptly, gravel skidding under the tires. He got out, slamming the door behind him, marching across the ditch toward the barn, as if confronting it could somehow undo the madness. Ezra shouted after him, but Nolan didn't listen. The air outside was colder, unnaturally still, and Nolan felt the silence pressing in like a weight. Up close, the barn smelled of rot and damp earth. The boards groaned under his hand when he touched them. He expected the wood to feel rough, splintered, but instead it felt damp, almost fleshy, like pressing against the skin of something alive. He jerked his hand back, staring at the moisture that clung to his palm. Ezra, watching from the car, saw something he would never forget. The floodlight buzzed and then went dark, plunging Nolan into shadow. But for a split second, Ezra swore he saw movement in the cracks of the barn wall, as if something inside had shifted to get closer to where Nolan stood. "Nolan! Get back here!" Ezra screamed. His friend stumbled backward, shaking his head, before sprinting to the car. They tore down the road, hearts hammering, breaths ragged. For a while, it felt like they were making progress, that they had left the nightmare behind. But 10 minutes later, headlights swept across that same splintered wood, that same crooked mailbox, and the same weak yellow glow. Only now, the floodlight didn't flicker. It burned steadily, almost brighter, almost welcoming. Ezra refused to look at it this time. He kept his eyes straight ahead, whispering under his breath like a prayer. Nolan's jaw was clenched so tightly it ached. He pressed harder on the gas, as if speed could break whatever grip the road had on them. But the speedometer didn't matter. Whether they crawled at 30 or raced at 80, 10 minutes later, the barn waited again. At some point, Ezra lost track of how many loops they'd done. 3, 4, 5, their sense of time unraveled. His watch read 1:30 in the morning, then 1:30 again, then 1:30 yet again, as if the minutes themselves refused to pass. Nolan's hands began trembling on the wheel. His eyelids drooped. "Stay awake, man," Ezra urged, panic rising in his voice. "You can't fall asleep now. Don't let this place get in your head." But Nolan's head dipped. His eyes closed for a heartbeat too long, then snapped open again. And then, without warning, Ezra blinked, and found himself staring at Nolan slumped over the wheel, the car idling at the side of the road. His friend's chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths like he had been asleep for hours. Ezra's voice cracked. "Nolan, wake up." He shook him, harder and harder, but Nolan didn't stir at first. When he finally did, his eyes were wide, disoriented. What happened?" Nolan rasped. "You fell asleep," Ezra said, his voice shaking. "You were out for almost an hour." Nolan stared at him in confusion. "No, I wasn't. I've been driving. I've been driving the whole time." But Ezra knew better. His watch told him an hour had passed. His own memory told him he'd been shouting Nolan's name, shaking him, begging him to wake. And yet the car hadn't moved an inch. They were still parked on the shoulder, the barn standing directly across from them like a sentinel. Something about the floodlight made Ezra's stomach twist. It wasn't just glowing anymore. It was pulsing, faintly, like the heartbeat of something alive. The shadows it cast along the barn wall stretched in unnatural directions, bending against the angles of the building itself. And for the first time, Ezra noticed something carved into the wood above the barn door. At least half a dozen names scrawled deep into the planks, worn by time but still visible. He squinted. They weren't just names, they were full names, followed by dates. Every date ended with the same year, 1968. Before Ezra could say a word, Nolan turned the key and the car roared forward, tires spitting gravel. He didn't care where the road went anymore, didn't care if it curved into the mountains forever. He just wanted distance, any distance. Ezra didn't argue. He kept his eyes shut tight, whispering over and over again, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." But in his gut, he already knew. No matter how far they drove, no matter how many times they tried to escape, that barn would always be there waiting, patient. The road didn't just loop, it consumed. And when Nolan glanced into the rearview mirror, his heart lurched into his throat. In the back seat, in the dim wash of dashboard light, two shapes sat silently where there should have been none. He didn't look again. He couldn't. They never spoke of it afterward. But sometimes, when Ezra closes his eyes, he still sees the faint glow of that floodlight. And Nolan, no matter how much he denies it, can't shake the feeling that something else is always riding in the car with him, waiting for the road to repeat again. Have you ever driven through the Appalachian Mountains at night? The roads curl like a serpent, the woods press in close, and sometimes you feel like you're driving not just through a place, but through time itself. Tonight's story comes from two college students who thought they were just on a road trip, but ended up stumbling onto something far older, stranger, and impossible to explain. And before we begin, I want to ask you, if you were on a dark mountain road low on gas, and you spotted a glowing little station out of nowhere, would you stop? Think about that as we dive into what became the most unforgettable night of their lives. It was late summer, the kind where the humidity still clings to your skin and the air tastes faintly of earth. James and Eric, two roommates from Ohio State, had decided to take a long weekend trip through the Appalachians, driving Eric's beat-up Toyota Corolla with the idea of camping, hiking, and maybe finding a dive bar or two along the way. They weren't thrill seekers, just ordinary guys looking for adventure. But anyone who's ever traveled through the mountains knows, adventure in Appalachia doesn't always look the way you expect. It was close to midnight when the gas light came on. The Corolla coughed, the needle dipping dangerously low. They hadn't seen a station for miles, and both admitted nervously that they'd forgotten to top off earlier in the evening. The GPS was useless. The signal had been gone for hours. They drove on, headlights sweeping across trees that seemed to lean closer and closer with every mile, until James spotted a dim orange glow ahead. "There," he said, pointing. It was a small gas station, almost quaint. A single old-fashioned pump stood out front beneath a flickering fluorescent light. The sign was half burned out, but the word "service" could still be made out. The building itself looked like something from a black and white photograph, maybe the 1950s. An old Coca-Cola machine sat outside, rust creeping up its sides, and a hand-painted board in the window read, "Open." Eric pulled in with relief. The place was silent, except for the buzzing light and the distant chirp of crickets. As they got out, the smell hit them first. Gasoline, yes, but mixed with something else. Something earthy, almost metallic, like iron left too long in the rain. An attendant stepped out from inside. He was tall, rail-thin, with suspenders holding up trousers that looked at least 30 years out of date. His face was lined, his eyes shadowed, but he smiled politely, wiping his hands on a rag. "Evening, boys," he said in a slow, almost wary drawl. "Need a fill-up?" The way he spoke made James feel like they'd stepped into another time. Still, Eric nodded. "Yeah, running on fumes." The man filled the tank himself, the old pump ticking loudly with every gallon. James noticed the numbers didn't make sense. The gallons pumped didn't line up with the price. It was too cheap, absurdly cheap, like 70 cents a gallon. He frowned, but said nothing. While waiting, Eric decided to stretch his legs. He peeked inside the building. A bell jingled as he stepped through the door. The place was a snapshot from the past, shelves lined with faded boxes of crackers, glass bottles of soda, dusty canned goods. A rotary phone hung on the wall. Behind the counter, a jar of pickled eggs sat cloudy with age. But what unsettled him wasn't the decor, it was the silence. No humming refrigerator, no radio, no sound of electricity. Just the creak of the wooden floor beneath his sneakers. The attendant finished pumping and took their cash. Cash only, no cards. He gave them change in coins so old they looked almost collectible. "Y'all have a safe drive now," he said. They thanked him, waved, and drove off, laughing about the strangeness of it all. "It's like we went back in time," Eric said. That guy looked like he hadn't changed a thing in 50 years. James pocketed one of the coins absent-mindedly. Probably some old family station. Cool vibe, though. But the next morning, when they stopped in town for breakfast, James told the waitress about the place. Small station, old sign, single pump, guy wearing suspenders. You know the one. The woman gave them a blank stare. "Honey, there ain't been a gas station out that way in decades. Closest one's 15 miles south." "No," Eric insisted. "We were just there. Last night. He filled up our tank." The waitress shook her head. "That station burned down back in '64. Folks said the attendant, Earl his name was, died in the fire." James laughed, but it sounded hollow. "No, come on." We talked to him. We handed him money. He pulled out the change, setting the coins on the counter. The waitress leaned forward, her face pale. "Where'd you get those?" "From the guy at the station," James said slowly. She whispered, "Those are silver coins. They stopped minting those years ago." The two friends looked at each other. Their skin prickled. Suddenly, the gas in their stomachs didn't sit right. The memory of the man's smile, the smell of iron in the air, the too cheap gas. All of it pressed down heavier now. Eric suggested they drive back, just to prove it. So after breakfast, they retraced their route. They drove the same winding roads, past the same landmarks, until finally they reached the spot where the station had been. But there was nothing there. No pump, no building, not even a foundation. Just overgrown weeds and a patch of cracked asphalt that looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Eric slammed the brakes and got out, pacing, his vor. No, it was right here. Right here!" He pointed, his hands shaking. We filled up. He took our money. I saw the shelves, the store. It was here. James stood frozen, the coins heavy in his palm. And then he noticed something. A faint scorch mark on the ground, blackened earth beneath the weeds. The stories were true. The station had burned. The man was gone. And yet, somehow they had been there, had met him, had fueled their car with gas that shouldn't exist. They left without another word, driving faster than they should have down those mountain roads. Neither spoke for hours, neither wanted to. Later, when they checked the Corolla's gas gauge, it was still full, too full. More miles than that car had ever managed, as if the tank wasn't burning through fuel at all. To this day, James swears that sometimes late at night, he can still smell that iron-tinged gasoline in the car. And Eric, he won't drive through Appalachia anymore. He says the roads feel alive, like they're waiting for him to stop at that station again. And the coins, those silver coins, they never tarnished, never dulled, no matter how many years passed. James doesn't carry them anymore. He keeps them locked in a box under his bed. He says some nights he hears the faint jingle of change and a man's slow drawl whispering, "Y'all have a safe drive now. Tell me, if you were lost in the Appalachians, low on gas, and saw a glowing little station by the roadside, would you pull in? Or would you drive on, praying your tank lasts long enough to get you anywhere else? Because sometimes the stations that offer salvation in the dark aren't from this world at all." Imagine you're driving alone through the Appalachian Mountains at night. Nothing but twisting roads, endless forest, and the hum of your engine to keep you company. No cell signal, no lights from houses, no sign of civilization. Just you, your headlights, and the creeping thought that if something were to happen, no one would know. Now picture this. You see someone on the side of the road, a boy, waving you down asking for help. Would you stop? That's the question one traveler has asked himself every single night since the encounter that changed him forever. He wishes now that he'd kept driving. It was late October, the kind of night when fog clings to the road like smoke and the trees look skeletal under the glow of the moon. Michael was 32, a software engineer from North Carolina, who had taken time off work to do a solo road trip through the Appalachians. He'd always loved history, folklore, and nature, and the mountains offered all three. But by the time his GPS lost signal and his fuel gauge dipped lower, the adventure no longer felt charming. The silence pressed against the car windows, broken only by the sound of gravel under his tires. At around 1 a.m., he spotted something ahead, a small figure by the roadside, standing just beyond the reach of his headlights. Michael slowed, his heart kicking up. At first, he thought it was a deer, the way it seemed too still, almost frozen. But then it raised an arm and waved. It was a child. Michael rolled to a cautious stop, flicking on his high beams. A boy stood on the shoulder of the road, maybe 10 years old, dressed in faded overalls and a threadbare shirt. His skin looked pale in the light, almost gray. His hand was lifted in a slow, almost mechanical wave. Michael lowered his window a crack. "Hey kid, you okay? You lost." The boy stepped forward, his shoes scraping on gravel. "Mister," he said softly, his voice flat and almost rehearsed. "Can you help me? Please?" Something in the way he spoke didn't sit right. It was too calm, too measured, like he wasn't scared at all. Michael's instincts told him to be cautious, but the boy looked small, vulnerable. He reached for the passenger door handle. "Where's your family?" Michael asked. The boy took another step. That's when the headlights caught his face fully. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The boy had no eyes, not missing, not injured. Just empty sockets, dark and hollow, as if his eyes had never been there at all. Michael froze, his hand still on the door. The boy tilted his head, as if listening to something far away. Then he spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Turn back." Michael's heart hammered in his chest. "What do you mean?" he stammered. The boy shook his head slowly. "Turn back. They're waiting for you." Every instinct screamed at Michael to hit the gas, but something about the boy rooted him to the spot. His empty sockets seemed to pull at him, drawing him into the darkness behind them. For a moment, he swore he heard voices whispering inside his own head, not his own thoughts, but layered murmurs in a language he didn't understand. He slammed the window shut and threw the car into drive. Gravel sprayed as he pulled away, glancing in the mirror. The boy hadn't moved. He was still standing in the same spot, arm raised in that slow, haunting wave, his eyeless face blank and unblinking. Michael drove for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before he reached a small diner lit by neon. Shaking, he stumbled inside. A middle-aged waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "You all right, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "There was a boy, out on the road, no eyes. He told me to turn back." The waitress's smile faltered. She glanced toward a man at the end of the counter, an older local in a trucker's cap. The man set down his coffee slowly. "You saw him?" "Two," the man said flatly. Michael blinked. "What do you mean, two?" The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Folks around here talk about the boy with no eyes. Travelers see him sometimes, usually at night, usually when they're lost. They say he's a warning." Michael swallowed hard. "Warning of what?" The man's eyes darkened. "That the road you're on don't lead where you think it does." Michael left the diner an hour later, but the man's words clung to him. He tried to tell himself it was exhaustion, that he'd imagined the sockets, the whispers. But the next night, as he slept in a roadside motel, he dreamed of the boy again. Standing at the foot of his bed, tilting his head, whispering the same words, "Turn back." The following day, Michael tried to cut his trip short, heading for the interstate. But no matter which turns he took, his GPS malfunctioned, spinning, rerouting him onto smaller, winding roads through thick woods. And then, in the late afternoon, as the fog began to gather again, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, standing by the shoulder of the road, was the boy. The same overalls, the same blank sockets, waving slowly as though Michael had never left. Michael didn't stop this time. He pressed harder on the gas, speeding past, but as he did, he heard something, clear as if whispered directly into his ear. It's too late now. That night, Michael never made it to a motel. His car broke down on a deserted stretch of road, the engine coughing before dying completely. When he tried to call for help, his phone screen flickered, then went black. The woods pressed in from all sides, and the silence was suffocating. And that's when he heard it. The crunch of small footsteps on gravel. A child's voice, soft and steady. "Mister, can you help me? Please." Michael never told anyone what happened next. When another driver found his car the following morning, it was empty. The doors were locked from the inside. His belongings were still in the back seat, but Michael himself was gone. The only clue left behind was something on the passenger seat, a small, rust-colored handprint the size of a child's. Some say the boy with no eyes is a spirit trying to save travelers, warning them from going deeper into the mountains. Others believe he isn't a warning at all, but a lure, drawing people off the road into something darker, something they can't come back from. But one thing is certain, if you ever find yourself driving alone in the Appalachians at night, and you see a boy waving you down, don't stop. Don't roll down your window. Don't listen when he whispers. Because if you look into those empty sockets for too long, you may never leave those mountains again. And maybe, just maybe, that boy isn't warning you to turn back. Maybe he's warning you that it's already too late. Imagine you're driving through the Appalachians late at night. The road is winding, two narrow lanes curling around mountains, with cliffs on one side and endless black woods on the other. Your headlights stretch only so far before the darkness swallows them whole. There are no other cars, no houses, not even the faint glow of a farmhouse window. Just silence, the hum of your tires, and the creeping thought that something is watching from those trees. And then, in your rearview mirror, you see it, headlights, a vehicle you hadn't noticed before. They appear too suddenly, too close. It's a white pickup truck, old, rusted, its grille looming right behind you, and no matter how fast you drive, it doesn't back off. That's the beginning of a story that countless travelers in these mountains swear is true. The white pickup is not just a ghost story. It's a nightmare that has chased people across state lines. It was late summer when a couple from Kentucky, Sam and Rebecca, decided to cut through a back road that ran along the Blue Ridge. They were returning from a family gathering, and what was supposed to shave off an hour turned into the longest drive of their lives. The road was pitch black, save for the moonlight breaking through tree branches. Sam kept his hands tight on the wheel, leaning forward. He'd driven country roads before, but something about this stretch felt wrong. The silence was too heavy, the kind that pressed down on you until you swore you could hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Rebecca tried to break the tension with the radio, but every station was static. She sighed, leaning back in her seat, and that's when she noticed it. "Sam," she whispered, "there's a truck behind us." Sam glanced in the mirror. Sure enough, two headlights glared back at him. An old white pickup had appeared out of nowhere, its grille so close he could almost make out the chipped paint and bent bumper. Sam frowned. Where the hell did he come from? I didn't see him. The truck surged forward, nearly bumping their rear bumper. Rebecca grabbed the door handle, knuckles white. "Sam, he's too close. Speed up." Sam pressed the gas. The car rattled as they picked up speed on the uneven road, but the pickup stayed glued to them, its engine roaring like an animal. The road wound sharper, each turn a risk, but the truck matched every move perfectly, never gaining distance, never losing it. Its headlights filled the mirror, blinding and suffocating, as though it wanted them to see nothing else. Rebecca twisted in her seat, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver. I can't see anyone. It's too dark. The glass looks wrong, like it's all blacked out. Sam gritted his teeth. He's just some drunk redneck messing with us. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The truck's movements were too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't just tailgating, it was hunting. For nearly 20 minutes, the white pickup stayed locked behind them, no matter how sharp the turns, no matter how steep the hills. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Sam blinked at the empty mirror, heart pounding in disbelief. What the hell? Where'd he go? Rebecca spun in her seat, scanning the road behind them. Nothing. Not even the glow of retreating taillights. Just darkness swallowing the road. He was right there, she whispered. Sam, I swear he was right there. They tried to calm themselves, but the unease never left. The rest of the night passed in silence, the kind that felt more like a warning than peace. When they told Rebecca's uncle about it the next day, his face went pale. He leaned in and whispered, "You saw it, the pickup. Folks round here don't like to talk about it, but plenty have seen it. That truck chases you down like it's alive, and it don't stop until you're out of these mountains. Some say it's the spirit of a man who died in a wreck years ago. Others say it's something worse, something that pretends to be a truck so it can stalk whoever wanders too far into these back roads." Sam laughed it off, but inside he couldn't shake the feeling that the old man was right. Weeks later, another traveler, a college student named Daniel, was cutting through the same stretch of highway after visiting friends in Virginia. He'd heard the stories but thought they were just local legends meant to scare outsiders. Around midnight, with his music playing low and the windows cracked to the humid mountain air, the road stretched ahead empty and silent. Until it wasn't. Two lights bloomed in his mirror. A white pickup, closer than it should have been, moving faster than it had any right to on that winding road. Daniel muttered a curse and tapped the brakes, hoping the truck would pass, but instead it surged forward, close enough that he felt the tremor of its engine shake his little car. He tried to wave it around, even pulled slightly toward the shoulder, but the pickup never budged. It only grew more aggressive, swerving left, then right as if toying with him, then snapping back in line inches from his bumper. Daniel's pulse skyrocketed. He floored the gas, the speedometer climbing, the road a blur beneath him. Still, the pickup matched him, never pulling ahead, never falling behind. At one point, Daniel swore he saw something impossible, the driver's window rolling down. Only there wasn't a driver, no face, no hands, no body, just emptiness inside the cab, and yet the wheel turned smoothly as though invisible hands gripped it. Daniel screamed, slamming the wheel as he rounded another curve. He pushed harder, desperate, his car roaring as it strained against the mountain incline. The pickup's headlights flared one last time in the mirror, blinding him, and then gone. Just like that. The road behind him was empty, silent, endless. When Daniel finally reached the state line, he pulled over, chest heaving, tears streaking his face. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He swore he could still hear the growl of the engine, the rattle of that rusted grill. Locals say the white pickup never leaves the mountains. It will chase you, terrorize you, push you to the edge of panic, but it always disappears once you escape the boundary of the Appalachians. Some believe it's tied to an accident decades ago, when a drunk driver in a white truck careened off one of those roads, killing a family. They say his spirit roams the highways angry, reckless, reliving the crash by tormenting strangers. Others insist it isn't human at all, that it's something older, something that wears the shape of a truck, because that's what frightens travelers most. Being chased, hunted, and knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it. There are dozens of accounts from drivers, some who made it home shaken, some who never made it at all. Missing person reports in these mountains sometimes include one detail no one can ignore: the last phone call, the last text. The last panicked words always mention the same thing: There's a truck. It's chasing me. So the next time you find yourself on a lonely Appalachian road, miles from the nearest town, and headlights suddenly flare in your mirror where there should be none, remember this story. Don't stop. Don't try to wave it around. Don't look too closely at the driver's seat, because the white pickup doesn't want to pass you. It wants to follow you, to cling to your bumper until the fear consumes you. And if you're unlucky enough, you might be the one who doesn't make it out of those mountains alive. Some say it only follows until you cross the state line, but others whisper something worse, that sometimes, if it likes you, if it chooses you, the white pickup follows you home. It was supposed to be a simple drive back from the mountains, nothing more than a late night return after a long weekend of hiking. 4 of us had gone, crammed into an old Jeep with our boots tossed in the back and our clothes still carrying the smell of smoke from the campfire. The Appalachian night stretched out around us, winding 2-lane roads lit only by the beams of our headlights. It was close to midnight when the first veil of fog rolled across the asphalt. So thin at first it looked like smoke drifting across the ground. No one thought much of it. After all, mountain fog is common, especially after a damp evening. But then, as we curved around the bend, the fog didn't lift. It thickened, and then it thickened again. The headlights barely cut more than a few feet in front of us. Everything beyond the hood of the Jeep disappeared in white, as if we were driving into a blank page. Just slow down, Sarah whispered from the passenger seat, her hands tied around her seatbelt. It'll clear once we get lower. But the road wasn't taking us lower. We turned left, then right, the asphalt snaking in ways that didn't match the road we remembered. Every tree along the edge of the road was swallowed by the fog until they were only shadows pressing in closer and closer. Minutes passed, then maybe an hour. It was impossible to tell. The clock on the dash flickered strangely, first showing 12:09, then 2:36, then back again. We're not going the right way, James muttered from the back seat, checking his phone, but the GPS just showed a spinning circle. No signal, no map. The fog clung to the windshield like something alive, curling and shifting, sometimes parting just enough to show the road ahead before closing in again. The strange part was how silent everything became. No crickets, no night birds, not even the sound of wind through the trees. Just the Jeep's engine and the shallow breaths of 4 people trying not to admit we were getting scared. We tried turning around at one point, making a U-turn on what we thought was a wide shoulder, but when we circled back, the road looked exactly the same. Same cracked yellow lines, same leaning wooden post on the edge, same oppressive white blur swallowing everything past the headlights. It was as if the fog was pulling us into its own loop. The gas gauge dipped lower and lower, and the realization hit hard. We'd been driving for hours, but hadn't passed a single other car, a single house light, nothing. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing out the window, and that's when I saw it too. Figures, shapes. For a moment I thought it was just the trees again, shadows bent strange by the beams of our lights. But as we slowed down, we saw them more clearly, pale outlines of people standing just at the edge of visibility. Not moving, just waiting, half hidden in the fog. We couldn't see faces, only the faintest suggestion of heads and shoulders. One figure raised its arm slowly, like it was pointing further down the road. The Jeep lurched forward again without us deciding it. The fog swallowed the figures instantly. By now my knuckles hurt from gripping the wheel. Sweat prickled my back though the night was cold. Hours stretched into a blur, and the fuel needle kissed the red line. We were going to be stranded in the middle of nothing, swallowed in white. Sarah started crying quietly, trying to hide it by facing the window. James cursed under his breath, over and over, like if he stopped, something worse would happen. Then it hit us. The air was wrong, not just damp like mountain fog. It carried a smell, faint at first, then stronger, burning rubber and iron, sharp and metallic like blood. Every breath felt heavier, slower, as if the fog wanted to sink inside our lungs. My eyes watered, but I didn't dare pull over. Every time I thought about stopping, my mind filled with an image I couldn't shake, of those pale shapes pressing up to the windows if we dared stop moving. The clock flickered again, 3:33. Then the dash lights went out completely, plunging us into silence and darkness except for the faint glow of the headlights. For a second, I thought the Jeep had died. But the engine still rattled, the tires still hummed against the endless road. That was when Sarah's voice broke the silence, almost too soft to hear. "I don't think we're supposed to be here." The road bent sharp, and suddenly there was a break in the fog. Just a crack at first, a line of visibility opening like a curtain being pulled. And then, without warning, we burst out into clear night air. The stars above looked harsh and bright, the cool mountain wind rushing in through the vents like we'd surfaced from underwater. I slammed the brakes, pulling the Jeep to the shoulder, everyone gasping as if we'd all been holding our breath for hours. Behind us, the fog wall sat thick and still, stretching across the road like a barricade. We stared at it, no one daring to speak. Finally, James broke the silence. "Where the hell are we?" His phone lit up again, service bars flickering. The GPS blinked on, loading our location. It didn't make sense. We weren't anywhere near the winding back roads we'd taken to leave the mountains. Somehow, impossibly, we were in another state, hundreds of miles off course. The tank was nearly empty, the Jeep coughing as I tried to drive again. But a highway sign appeared just down the road, green letters shining in the high beams. Civilization. Relief. But none of us spoke on the ride to the nearest gas station. None of us dared look behind us at the wall of fog we knew was still there, standing on the horizon like it was waiting. Even now, I wonder if we were supposed to keep driving. If we'd followed that pointing figure deeper, if the gas had truly run dry, if the clock had struck one more impossible hour, would we have come out at all? Or would we still be circling that endless road, swallowed in the fog that follows? It was supposed to be nothing more than a long, quiet drive through the Appalachians. I'd been on the road since morning, weaving through small towns, fueling up when needed, and letting the rhythm of the highway keep me company. My plan was simple: reach the next city by midnight, crash in a cheap motel, and continue the rest of the way home the following day. Nothing unusual about it. But somewhere past sundown, while digging around in the glove box for a pack of gum, I found something that froze me in my tracks. A crumpled gas receipt. The paper was wrinkled and faintly greasy, like it had been there a while. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd been on the road plenty, and stray receipts always ended up in the glove box. But then I saw the date. It wasn't today's date. It wasn't yesterday's. It was tomorrow's, printed clearly, unmistakably. Tomorrow. My stomach tightened, and for a moment I thought maybe I was overtired reading it wrong. I rubbed my eyes, held the slip closer to the dash light. The timestamp at the top read under quantity for 2025, 11:14 p.m. tomorrow night, and then at the bottom, beneath the usual printout of gallons, cost, and pump number, someone had written in thick, slanted red ink, "Don't take the mountain road tonight." I laughed nervously at first, trying to shake it off. Some prank, I told myself. Maybe the cashier had a sense of humor. Maybe I'd grabbed someone else's receipt without realizing it. But even as I thought that, my hands felt clammy. Because I hadn't stopped for gas in hours, and the last station I remembered didn't give handwritten notes on their receipts. And the ink didn't look like it had been added at the counter. It looked like something scrawled later, messy, rushed. I shoved the receipt back into the glove box, but the words stuck in my mind. Don't take the mountain road tonight. The problem was, the mountain road was exactly where my GPS was pointing me. The fastest route through the dark curves, avoiding the long detour through the valleys. I could hear my old man's voice in my head, the way he used to warn me before road trips. The Appalachian mountains don't like to let go of people who don't respect them. I always laughed it off as just mountain folk superstition. But tonight, with that receipt burning in my pocket, it didn't feel so funny. The highway signs loomed, green against the blackness, and there it was, Route 77, the mountain pass. My blinker clicked on before I even thought about it. The road tilted upward, winding into the dark like a ribbon cutting through shadow. Almost immediately, the air felt heavier, colder. The trees pressed close on both sides, their branches curling like arms. I turned up the radio, trying to shake off the chill crawling across my skin, but the signal kept crackling, voices fading in and out as though someone else was whispering beneath the music. At first, it was just the fog, a thin mist that hugged the asphalt. But as I climbed higher, the fog thickened until my headlights barely cut through it. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel tighter, every muscle tense. And that's when I noticed something that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. My fuel gauge. I had filled up earlier in the day, enough to get me well past the mountains, but the needle was dropping fast, like I was burning twice as much fuel as usual. I tapped the glass, convinced it was just a faulty reading, but the needle kept sinking. A mile later, I saw it. A gas station, sitting like an island in the fog, flickering fluorescent lights, a single pump, the glow of a dirty convenience store window. Relief hit me hard, but it was tangled with unease. I hadn't seen a single building for miles, and I didn't remember this place being on the map. I pulled in anyway, the crunch of gravel loud under my tires. The place looked abandoned. Dust coated the windows, the sign overhead hung crooked, letters half missing. But the pump still blinked alive. I killed the engine and stepped out. The fog clung to me like wet cloth, muffling every sound. The pump handle was old, heavy, colder than it should have been. As I slid my card in, I glanced toward the door of the convenience store, and my blood ran cold. A man stood there just inside the glass, pale, still, watching. He didn't move when I met his gaze. His outline was blurred by the fogged window, but I could see his eyes. They looked too dark, too wide. I fumbled with the pump, hands shaking, trying not to look at him again. The receipt machine clattered as the transaction finished. Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I snatched the slip. My heart hammered as I read it under the buzzing light. Same date, tomorrow, same timestamp, 11:14 p.m., and again the same red scrawl at the bottom, don't take the mountain road tonight. I dropped the paper like it burned me. When I glanced back at the store window, the man was gone. The glass reflected only the dim outline of my car. I didn't wait another second. I shoved the handle back, leapt into the driver's seat, and slammed the Jeep into gear. Gravel spat from under the tires as I tore back onto the road. The fog was worse now, so thick it felt alive. My headlights bounced off walls of white, revealing shapes that weren't trees. Figures, standing along the road's edge, facing the car as I passed. I caught glimpses of their faces, blank, pale, eyes too hollow. They didn't move, they didn't blink. They just watched silent, as if waiting for me to stop. Every curve of the mountain brought more of them, standing in rows, closer and closer to the asphalt. Panic clawed at my throat. The radio crackled again, voices layering over each other in whispers. I could swear one of them was my own, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The fuel gauge dipped lower, impossibly fast. My vision blurred with fear, but I pressed the accelerator harder, begging the Jeep to keep moving. Then, out of the fog, headlights appeared. Relief surged. Another car, finally. I honked, flashed my lights, desperate not to feel alone on this cursed road. But as the vehicle drew closer, my stomach twisted. It was my Jeep. Same dents, same plates, same flicker of the right taillight. My Jeep driving straight toward me. I swerved at the last second, tires screaming, the world tilting as I narrowly avoided colliding with myself. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but fog again. No car, no lights. My breaths came ragged, my knuckles white on the wheel. The road seemed endless, looping, twisting in directions that didn't match the map in my head. I drove until the fuel needle buried itself on empty, yet somehow the Jeep kept moving. The clock on the dash glowed 11:14 p.m., the exact time printed on both receipts. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fog broke. The road spit me out onto a wide clearing, stars blazing overhead. My chest heaved, sweat plastered to my skin. I glanced around wildly, but the watchers were gone. The air was clear. My GPS flickered back to life, showing me a location miles from where I should have been. I had no idea how I'd gotten there, no memory of half the turns. I pulled into a rest stop, shaking, desperate for something normal. When I finally caught my breath, I opened the glove box, meaning to shove the cursed receipt deep into the pile of junk. But what I saw made my stomach drop to ice. Not one, not 2 dozens. Receipts, all with tomorrow's date, all time-stamped at 11:14 p.m. Each one bore the same red warning: don't take the mountain road tonight. I sat frozen, staring at the pile of paper, the truth sinking in with unbearable weight. I hadn't found the first receipt by accident. I had been finding them over and over, every night, on every trip through these mountains. And no matter how many times I tried to heed the warning, I always ended up back here, on this same cursed road, at the same cursed time. The gas gauge was empty, but the engine idled, steady as ever. I stared at the clock as it ticked over one final time, 11:14 p.m., and I realized with a hollow certainty that I was never leaving these mountains. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But don't leave yet. Hit that like button so I know you survived. Drop your thoughts in the comments because your story might be next. And make sure you subscribe, because the horrors waiting in the next video are even darker than this one. And once you press play, there's no turning back.